Hey, how's it going everyone? So one of the first lenses that beginner photographers buy when they're first starting out is the nifty 50 or 50mm f1.8. Pretty much every major camera manufacturer has one of these, but today I'm going to be focusing on the Sony E-mount version. With a trend going on for the last couple of years of people really wanting to slim down their setups, I wanted to see if this lens can fit the mold of that and whether or not it's a viable option for an everyday setup. Last week I brought this lens out with me to the annual Aloha Festival here on Oahu to see how it performed as an everyday street photography lens. It was really awesome to see the locals from around the island come together to celebrate our state and all the islands all together. So today I'm going to go over where this lens shines, other areas where maybe not so much, as well as my overall experience using this lens on that day in general, since I've had this lens pretty much since I switched to Sony a few years ago in my career. So with that being said, let's jump into it. So let's jump into first what I like about the lens, and that's definitely its price. So this lens retails for $249, but since it's been well over 8 years since it came out, you can definitely find it for well under that in the used marketplace, which is probably why a lot of beginners like to go for this guy, because you get that low aperture, blurry background on a really good budget. So the size and weight is also another factor that makes this lens really popular, and which is why I've picked it up again. When I got out to Waikiki today, I wasn't really trying to show up as a professional photographer or anything like that. My goal was to not try to draw too much attention to myself and really just immerse myself into the environment and capture all the action as it was happening. The size and weight of this lens really definitely helps with that. And I just highlighted this earlier, but of course the 1.8 aperture is a big selling point of this lens. And even though I rarely use f1.8 and mostly shoot on f2 to f4 just to make sure I'm nailing my focus, it is nice to know that I do have the f1.8 option available when I really do want it. So now we're jumping into things I don't really like about the lens. And the first off is the plastic body build. While it doesn't really affect the performance of the lens, it does make the lens feel kind of cheap, I guess, and feel like a toy. But in my opinion, if you're not planning on pulling up to like a wedding or some big production set where the optics really matter to the client or whatnot, I don't think that this should bother most people. Even though this lens has that plastic build, durability definitely hasn't been an issue for me. Another thing that I would say this lens lacks that a lot of modern Sony G and G Master lens have, and I've definitely become used to, is the custom ring or aperture ring. So because most of my other G lenses or G Master lenses have this, I sometimes do get tripped up when I need to use the dial on my camera to adjust my aperture because I'm so used to using the actual aperture ring on my other lenses. The next thing that this lens is not so great in is the minimum focus distance. And to put it blunt, it's not really that great. You can compensate using a macro converter or a diopter filter, but this doesn't bother me too much either, because I don't have the intention of shooting macro shots when I am pulling this lens out of my bag. Next thing is focusing. So I have heard on older Sony bodies that there have been focusing issues with this lens and it's kind of slow and sluggish. But luckily with the new modern Sony bodies that have come out within the last few years, if you have one of those, you shouldn't really have an issue. This day I was shooting on, the parade was pretty chaotic with a lot going on. And aside from a couple missed shots that I was shooting in continuous burst mode, it handled everything flawlessly. One other thing that also sways people away from this lens when it comes to the focusing is the noise that it makes when it's trying to hunt focus. But for me, for what I use this lens for, that doesn't bother me. You see, when you're out and about taking street photos or even out and about in general with all the ambient noise going around you, it's even hard to hear the lens focusing in general. And sometimes, most of the time, you actually don't even notice it. And if you pair it with the modern Sony body with good autofocus, the autofocus still works very well. Video is where this lens could have an issue though if you plan on using it for video, because the mic, since it's so close to the lens, could potentially pick up on those noises. But me personally, I only use this lens to shoot B-roll where I'm not really intending to use the audio at all, and I'm only really locking in the focus once. So this really comes down to knowing how you shoot and what you're trying to shoot. So now that we've gone over what I like and don't like about the lens, let's come and break down some of the results that we got on this day. One thing that makes the 50mm probably one of, if not my favorite focal length to shoot at the moment, is it's that perfect sweet spot to shoot a variety of different compositions. You can get a wide shot of, say, a group or a huge scene pretty effortlessly, but you can also really get in there and shoot a lot of detailed shots as well. I also like that the idea of that you don't have to go right up to someone or into really all of the action for the shots, as in my opinion that can really throw some people off and it can ruin that authenticity and the candidness of the photos that you would get otherwise. I really liked how the people watching the parade were watching and cheering on, and I wanted to make sure I could get some shots of them in the foreground interacting with the people coming down without really having to just really make them feel like uncomfortable or shocked that there was a camera pointing right at them. For most of the morning I was there, I was shooting in the audience along the sidewalk. But there was also a brief moment where I was able to step out into the road and really get a nice straight on shot down the road with a lot of leading lines and whatnot. But at that point, I thought my compositions were getting a little dull and I was trying to figure out what was causing that. And I realized that was because up until that point, I was shooting everything very straight on. So in that moment when I got a chance to walk onto the road real quick, I saw the Moana marching band coming up. So I used the opportunity to get as low on the ground as possible without, of course, before they completely trample me. And I used the road as a bit of a foreground to get a bit of a hero shot of the band. And another thing I really like about this shot is how I was able to create depth and layers with the foreground, of course, and then the band and then also with the buildings and the palm trees in the background as well. As I kept venturing down Waikiki, one of the main things I've been loving about street photography as opposed to other genres that I'm more familiar with, such as landscapes, lifestyles, and whatnot, is how street photography really challenges you to be selective of what you include or not include in your frame. And that's definitely something that I've been growing in. There was one point when I saw that they were doing a big showcase on a lot of these really cool vintage cars, a lot of Volkswagen Beetles and whatnot, and they're all coming down. And I wanted to get at least a couple frames of these vintage Volkswagen Beetles and other cool whips that are being shown off just coming down the road. And I really wanted to try my best to isolate these cars and not have too much other distracting things in my composition. These shots right here were the shots I got of that. And there's one particular shot right here where it was pretty straight on. I was shooting from the sidewalk and the audience again. And one thing that I think I definitely could have improved on in this shot is I probably could have took at least a few steps forward, a few steps closer into the road, closer to the car, to help create that separation from the car and then the crowd of people in the back as well. So the last shot I wanted to touch on is this last photo I took at the end of the parade, and I really like this shot, and it's probably one of my favorite photos I took of the day. And that's because I wanted to get something with the International Marketplace sign in the background, just because it's such an iconic spot and it's such a well-known place when you think of Waikiki. So I kind of just camped out there for a little bit, for probably 10 minutes or so, and I waited and I saw opportunity as one of the last floats of the day were coming by, and I was able to snap an awesome shot of some hula dancers with some spectators in the foreground as well. And I think this shot is really awesome because it has, again, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the layers. So you have the foreground with the audience, the main subject, which are the hula dancers, and a really powerful background too with the International Marketplace sign in the background. So this ended up being one of the favorite shots of the day for me. So that wraps up today's video. And as always, I really hope you guys were able to learn something about this tiny budget lens and what it's capable of even over 8 years later and for only roughly a couple $100. While this lens has always been a favorite for beginner photographers getting into photography, I really do think that it can make a bit of a resurgence as an everyday compact street photography lens for even more advanced users as well. All the photos that were shown in today's video were edited using my Essentials preset pack. So if you're interested in checking those out for yourself, the link will be in the description. If you're new around here, a subscribe would mean the world to me. And with that being said, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for watching and staying to the end. I hope you have a great rest of your day and take it easy.